It's strange how two people can live under the same roof, share the same kitchen, pass each other in the hallway, and still feel like strangers. That's how it had been with Liam and me. When I married Daniel a little over a year ago, I knew he had a son from his first marriage. I knew Liam was in his early 20s, a college student, and that he lived with us part-time when classes got overwhelming, or when he needed a break from his mother's place. What I didn't know was how quiet things could be when he was around. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, the kind that happens when you're reading in the same room as someone you love. No. This was the kind of quiet that fills every corner like fog. A polite, careful silence, heavy with things neither of us wanted to say out loud. I could tell Liam was still figuring out what to make of me. To him, I was probably just his dad's new husband, a guy who suddenly appeared in the middle of his life, setting plates on the dinner table like he belonged there. And in a way, I understood. Step-parents don't exactly get a warm welcome by default, especially when you're dealing with someone who's already an adult. Our interactions were minimal. A nod in the morning if we passed in the kitchen. A quiet hey if I got home before Daniel and Liam was already there. Sometimes I'd hear him in the living room playing music, soft enough that I couldn't quite make out the lyrics. I'd think about stepping in, maybe asking about the song, but I never did. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't know how. It was a Thursday night in late autumn when everything changed. Daniel had flown out that morning for a 3-day business trip in Chicago, leaving the house just for the two of us. I told myself it would be fine. We'd survive on minimal interaction just like before. But that night, just after 8 p.m., the rain started. Not the soft kind that whispers against the windows, but a heavy, pounding storm that turned the street into a silver blur. I was in the kitchen making tea when the lights flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The house went dark, except for the faint orange glow of the street lamp outside. Filtered through the rain, I waited, thinking the power would come back in. A second. It didn't. A voice came from down the hallway. Alex. It was Liam. His door opened just enough for his face to appear in the shadows. Yeah, I called back. Looks like the power's out. He stepped into the hallway, phone in. Hand the flashlight on. Great, he said, his tone halfway between sarcasm and resignation. Wi-Fi's dead too. I smiled faintly. We're going to have to survive the old-fashioned way, gave a half laugh, then looked past me toward the kitchen. Do we have candles or something? 10 minutes later, we had the living room. Lit with 3 thick candles I found in a drawer, their flames flickering against the walls. The storm outside made the room feel smaller, safer somehow, like the rest of the world had been shut out. Liam sat on the far end of the couch, phone in his lap, scrolling aimlessly through whatever worked without internet. I sat on the other end, tea warming my hands. For a while, the only sounds were the rain and the occasional creak of the house. You always drink tea? He asked suddenly, eyes still on his phone. I looked over at him, surprised. Yeah, helps me think. He gave a small nod, as if filing away the information. I've never been a tea person, he said after a pause. Coffee, sure, energy drinks, too many of those. But tea always seemed, I don't know, boring. I smirked. It's because you haven't had the right kind. And just like that, a door cracked open between us, small but there. Talked about tea of all things. About the best coffee shops he'd found near campus. About how I once tried an espresso so strong it made me dizzy for an hour. Nothing deep. Nothing. Life changing. But in that moment, it felt like progress. The storm raged on outside, the windows rattling now and then. Liam leaned back into the couch cushions, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. Feels weird, he said quietly. No TV, no music, just sitting here. Yeah, I agreed. Kind of forces you to notice things. He glanced over at me, and for a second, his expression was softer than I'd ever seen it. Like what? I hesitated, then shrugged. Like the fact that we've barely talked since I moved in. That hung in the air between us. Not an accusation, not even really a question, just a truth that neither of us had wanted to name until now. Yeah, he said finally. I guess we haven't. The candles flickered again, their light catching in his eyes. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, as if it had all the time in the world inside. For the first time since I'd known him, it felt like we might too. The storm showed no sign of letting up. The power was still out, the candles still burning. Low, and the silence between us felt different now. Not the heavy, awkward quiet from before, but a space that might actually hold something. Liam shifted in his seat, resting his elbow on the arm of the couch. You know, he said after a moment, I wasn't sure if you actually liked me. When you first moved in, I blinked, caught off guard. What? Why would you think that? He gave a short shrug, his eyes fixed on the candle flame. You just never really talked to me. I figured maybe you were just here for my dad. Leaned forward, elbows on my knees. It wasn't that, I said carefully. I just didn't know how to step into your life without making it weird. You already had a rhythm with your dad, and I didn't want to mess that up. His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Guess we both didn't know what to do with each other. I laughed softly. Yeah, seems like it. We sat like that for a while, two people who had been circling the same unspoken truth for months, finally starting to walk toward it. It started small. Liam told me about a music theory class he was struggling with, how the professor graded like every student was auditioning for an orchestra. I told him about the time I'd joined my high school band, thinking it would be fun. I quit 2 weeks later because I couldn't read sheet music to save my life. He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and warm. I didn't realize until then how rare it was to hear him sound like that. The conversation deepened without us really meaning for it too. He spoke about his parents' divorce, how he was 13 when it happened, old enough to understand the fights but too young to stop them. How do you even process something like that? He asked quietly. One day you're a family, the next you're just visiting each other's houses? I looked at him, and for a second, I saw myself at that age. Honestly? Process it all at once, I said. You just keep going. And then, one day, you realize you've learned how to live with the cracks. He nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. That's what it feels like, he murmured. Like I'm patched together but not the same as before. There was something in his voice, not just sadness, but a quiet resilience. The kind you only get from carrying heavy things for a long time. When it was my turn to speak, I told him about my own past. Growing up in a small, conservative town, realizing I was gay long before I had the courage to say it out loud. The friends I lost when I did. He listened without interrupting, its expression unreadable but focused. I guess I never thought about you having your own stuff, he said after a while. Everyone has their own stuff, I replied, most of the time. We just don't see it unless we're looking close enough. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and for a moment, the candlelight wavered. In that flickering glow, I realized something. We weren't strangers anymore. Not completely. We still had a long way to go, sure, but the walls between us, they had cracks now. Sometimes cracks are how the light gets in, the rain outside. Had slowed to a steady patter, like a drummer finding a softer rhythm. It was well past midnight, but neither of us made a move toward bed. The room had taken on a kind of stillness that felt sacred, like the world outside had paused so we could keep talking. Liam was the first to break the quiet. Can I tell you something I've never said out loud? I nodded. Of course. Exhaled slowly, like he was weighing every word. When Dad married you, I thought it was the beginning of the end. That you were going to replace him somehow? Or that he'd forget about me. My chest tightened. Liam, I could never replace your dad, and he could never forget you. You're his son. I know, he interrupted gently, but knowing and feeling aren't always the same thing. That hit me harder than I expected. I thought about all the times I'd mistaken silence for indifference, when really it had just been fear or uncertainty hiding in plain sight. Do you know what I thought? I said. He tilted his head. What? That you didn't want me here. That I was just occupying space you wished I'd leave. His eyes widened a little. I never wanted that. I just Didn't know how to let you in without feeling like I was betraying Mom somehow. There it was, the truth. It's not wrapped in polite small talk or sidestepped with humor, just raw, human honesty. I leaned back, letting his words settle. That makes sense, I said quietly, and it's okay. I think we've both been carrying things we didn't know how to share. He gave me a look, searching, almost wary. Like what? I hesitated, then took a breath. Like how much I've wanted to be someone you could trust. Not just as your dad's husband, but as someone who sees you, really sees you. Something shifted in his expression then, a small crack in the armor. The conversation turned deeper. Winding into places I didn't expect, he told me about his struggles with identity. How being bisexual made him feel like he didn't fit neatly anywhere. Too gay for some spaces, too straight for others. How do you even explain that to people who just want a simple answer? He asked. You don't, I replied. You just keep being you. The right people won't need an explanation. He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to decide whether to believe me. Then, slowly, he nodded. Thanks, he said, for not making it weird. Why would it be weird? I asked. Because not everyone can handle honesty without turning it into something else. Clock on the mantel ticked softly. Somewhere in the distance, the refrigerator hummed to life as the power flickered back on. But neither of us moved to turn on the lights, because in that moment, the darkness didn't feel empty anymore. It felt safe. We didn't solve everything that night. There were still layers we hadn't touched, scars we hadn't shown. For the first time since I'd stepped into this house, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were building something real. The truth hadn't broken us. It had started to bind us together. Morning came quietly. The rain had stopped, leaving. Behind streets glistening like glass, sunlight spilled in through the blinds, drawing thin golden lines across the living room carpet. For the first time in weeks, I woke without the heaviness in my chest. Liam was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming mug between his hands. He didn't notice me at first. His gaze was fixed on the world outside the window. Eyes thoughtful but lighter than before. Morning, I said softly. He looked up and a small, genuine smile crossed his face. Morning. It was such a simple thing, but after the walls we'd torn down last night, it felt like a quiet victory. We ate breakfast in easy conversation, not avoiding the hard topics, but not drowning in them either. But just as I started clearing the dishes, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and whatever warmth had been on his face drained away. You okay? I asked. It's Mom, he said after a pause. She wants to meet for lunch today. The name hung in the air like a shadow. I'd never met her, but I'd felt her presence in the gaps between Liam's sentences. In the hesitations when certain topics came up. You don't have to go if you're not ready, I said carefully. No, he said, shaking his head. I think I need to. But he stopped, then looked at me with a seriousness that made my breath catch. Would you come with me? It wasn't a request I'd expected. Are you sure? I asked. This might be complicated. Exactly, he replied. That's why I don't want to do it alone. A couple hours later, we were sitting in a small corner booth at a cafe downtown. Liam fidgeted with the edge of his sleeve while we waited. When his mom walked in, I saw the resemblance immediately. The same eyes. The same way they scanned the room before landing on someone. She approached, her smile tight, polite. Liam. Hi, Mom, he said, voice steady but softer than usual. She glanced at me briefly, then back to him. And you must be Alex. I am, I said, extending my hand. She shook it, cool, formal, before sliding into the seat. Across from us for a moment. The silence was so thick I could hear the clink of cutlery from tables across the cafe. Liam was the first to speak. I wanted us to talk. All three of us. His mom raised an eyebrow. About what? He hesitated, then said, about who I am. And about how I need you to accept that. All of it. Her jaw tightened. Liam, we've been over this, no. Mom, he interrupted. We've avoided this. And I'm done avoiding it. His voice didn't waver. Mine almost did, because watching him sit there, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering, I realized just how much courage it was taking. We talked for over an hour. It wasn't perfect. There were pauses, misunderstandings, even a few sharp words. But by the end, something had shifted. His mom didn't stand up and leave. She didn't shut him down. She listened. And for the first time, she said, "I may not understand everything, Liam, but I do love you." When we left the cafe, Liam let out a breath that seemed 2 empty weeks of tension from his body. "Thank you for being there," he said. "You didn't need me," I told him. "You did that yourself." You broke the silence. He smiled, and it wasn't the guarded smile I'd seen before. This one was open, unafraid. That night, the house felt different, warmer. We'd faced something big, and we'd done it together, but neither of us knew that the hardest test was still coming. The morning after felt unreal. I woke before the sun, lying there in the stillness, my mind replaying every word from the night before. We'd stayed up for hours, long after the rest of the house had gone quiet, talking, laughing, sitting in those rare, comfortable silences that only happen when two people have finally stopped holding back. I could still see the moment, that exact second, when Liam's eyes shifted, when the guarded look was gone and in its place was trust, not the kind you hand over lightly, but the kind you protect for years until someone proves they won't break it. We hadn't solved everything. We still had questions, uncertainties, the weight of the past. But last night, something shifted. We weren't just living in the same space anymore. We were in the same story. The smell of coffee drifted down the hall. When I walked into the kitchen, Liam was there, leaning against the counter, his hair a mess, his hoodie rumpled from sleep. He looked up at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Hey, you survived my endless talking." Teased, pouring myself a cup. We ate breakfast together without the usual small talk. Instead, we talked about the next steps, about how he'd call his mom again soon, maybe even visit her on his own next time, about the college applications. "Sitting on his desk feels weird," he said at one point. "Like I'm not just existing anymore. Like I'm actually moving forward." "That's because you are," I said. After breakfast, we took a walk around the block. The air was crisp, and the world felt unusually awake, the kind of morning where even the smallest things seemed alive with possibility. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. At one point, Liam glanced at me and said, almost to himself, "Last night was the first time in a long time I didn't feel alone." Back at the house, we lingered by the front door. I knew life would get busy again. Days would pass. Challenges would come, but something about this morning told me we'd carry that night with us. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. That's the thing about moments like these. They don't announce themselves with fireworks. They don't demand to be remembered. They simply stay with you. Quietly, steadily, like sunlight spilling into a room you once thought would always be dark. And as we stood there, mugs still warm in our hands, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, we'd face it together.